Thank you so much, Mark. As Mark said, we've known each other for several years. I think it's over 30, around 30 years now. And the first time I met Mark, we were this group of architects in the English-speaking Caribbean, which is called ACSAC. And I was the chairman of ACSAC. And whenever we got together, all the various institutes would come and present reports, and everybody was, complaining, foreign architects taking our work, or this is happening, and government not giving us work, and so on. And all of a sudden, there was somebody who came with a completely different perspective or attitude. Instead of looking at the glass and thinking it was half empty, Mark came and showed us that it was not just half full, but increasing in content. And from then, Mark has a way, well, I guess you guys would know, of conveying and debating and getting people around to his way of thinking. And he was instrumental in our negotiations from the small Caribbean islands in Brussels with the European Union, looking at an economic partnership agreement between architects. So I'm privileged to be here this evening. Okay, in the old brochure days, HM+RW's profile boldly proclaimed that central to the design philosophy of the practice is the creation of an architecture of relevance. It went on to outline the firm's approach to architectural design and problem solving, with primary focus on what we call the 5 C's in the design process, which are the client, the context, the culture, the cost, and coming out of that, the 6th C, which is the concept, would emerge. Today, I'd like to present a few of HM+RW's projects that range from a small house done over 35 years ago to a fairly large university building and others in between that represent an attitude to place, to nature, and to people. Before commencing, however, it might be useful to share a little bit about my background. And this I didn't plan to do, but Mark asked me to say a few words on that, and how I became an architect, and where I lived and where I currently practice. I'm from Jamaica, which is a small island, a tropical island in the Caribbean Sea, approximately 12,000 kilometers northwest of Johannesburg, around halfway between North and South America, and just east of Mexico. It's the 3rd largest island in the Antilles, Cuba and Hispaniola being the other 2. Jamaica has a little less than 3 million people, which I gather is around half of the population of the city alone. The island is mountainous with a central ridge, and it goes up to around 2,256 meters above sea level, with the Blue Mountains in the eastern end. The weather is generally hot, averaging between 26 and a low of 21 in the cooler months, which are November to March, and 33 degrees in the summer. So when you look and compare Jamaica with Johannesburg, our coolest time of the year is equivalent to your hottest time of the year.
That's right.
And that's why I'm so cold today. Another sharp climatic contrast is the humidity, which you see in this bottom right diagram, which ranges from 80 to 100% in Jamaica compared to nearly 0 in Johannesburg. The island is also susceptible to hurricanes, usually between June and November. The most famous, and also to earthquakes, the most famous earthquakes being in 1692, which destroyed Port Royal, which was then called the wickedest city in the world, with pirates, plundering, and prostitutes. And in 1907, which destroyed Kingston, the capital. The sun is overhead for most of the day, with sun angles between 40 and 50 degrees in the cool months and -5 degrees in the summer. So unlike many temperate regions, the best face is north rather than south, as we try to hide from the sun and the heat rather than embrace it during the winter months. While our motto is out of many one people, the vast majority of the population is of African descent, with 15% Afro-European, 3.5% Indian and Indo-African, 3% Caucasian, 1.2% Chinese, and other mixtures. Wow. Jamaica, like many other Caribbean islands, suffered under slavery for almost 350 years, but never gave up the fight, with runaway slaves like Maroons defeating the English. One may ask, what is Jamaica's culture known for? One could argue rum, reggae, Bob Marley, and dancehall, Vibes Cartel. Its cuisine, ackee and saltfish, jerk pork, curry goat, and patty. Its cricket, Chris Gayle, and its track, Usain Bolt. Well, so it is in this context, climate, and culture that I grew up and still live. I was fortunate to have middle-class parents, my father, a civil servant, who worked in Trinidad for the evolving West Indian Federation in the early 50s, and later as a statistician in independent Jamaica, and my mother, a World War II veteran ATS radar operator, who later became the first woman to sit on the bench in Jamaica. The newspapers at the time reported that people would visit the Sutton Street Court in downtown Kingston just to see this novelty. My early years were spent on Cranbourne Avenue in Eastwood Park, near Halfway Tree, where my family lived in a medium-sized 3-bedroom gabled roof concrete house with carport. Interestingly, there was a smaller 2-bedroom flat behind where an older white couple lived. Little did I know that they owned the property and my parents were the tenants. Based on her elevated position, my mom was soon entitled to a government house on Lady Musgrave Road, a tree-lined main road that led to King's House, which was the official residence of the Governor General. And the road was named after a former governor's wife. The myth goes that after the first black millionaire, George Stibel, built Devon House, a magnificent Jamaican Georgian structure on Hope Road, the more direct route to King's House, Lady Musgrave refused to travel that path and had the governor build a new road, Lady Musgrave Road, so that she could avoid passing Devon House. Our house was number 47, not quite as imposing, but nevertheless an excellent example of tropical architecture. The building was raised off the ground to allow breezes to cool the main floor and had a knob core of stones and cement. In the middle of this was a wraparound veranda enclosed with a combination of rectangular wood lattice and wood louvers on the ground floor and wood balusters and wood louvered casement windows on the first floor. It was on the latter veranda that I designed my first housing community, using what was at the time luscious jelly boxes as houses and matchbox cars. In front of this house within a house was a huge front lawn where we played cricket, football, and croquet. The yard was well fruited with lignum vitae, pui, and cherry trees, as well as many different types of mango trees. Under the Bombay tree, I created my first urban design, using matchbox trucks and bulldozers to make roads in the dirt, then lots, and finally the town center. The place was called Anstown, for obvious reasons. And we couldn't play there too long without being badly bitten. So why did I become an architect? The answer is extremely silly, but true. There were two reasons, equally corny and illogical in a way. The first was that as long as I can remember, I always liked the word architect. It sounded so much more sophisticated and novel than lawyer, doctor, or Indian chief. The second is that the only architect that I knew as a little boy was a family friend named HaroldMorrison, who I later found out was Jamaica's first black architect. He was always a very happy, jovial man, forever smiling and always exuding joy. For some strange reason, I equated the word architect with happiness and the one who makes others happy. Then I reached the age of 10 and was shipped off to boarding school in Mandeville, in the middle of the island, after winning a tuition scholarship. As it turned out, this was the same school that Gordon Gill, the famous Chicago architectural firm Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill attended. When I reached sixth form, I was lucky one career day to have heard Bert Robinson from the first all-Jamaican architectural firm give a talk on architecture. One of the things he said, which I'll never forget, is that clients don't really know what they want. So it's up to you to make it. Later, my headmaster sent me to meet with one Jerry Sibley, who encouraged me to study in Canada or the United States. At the time, there were no schools of architecture in the English-speaking Caribbean, and the UK was the only logical place to go. Again, I was lucky to get into the AA in London and McGill in Canada, but was shortlisted for Cornell University. I was in London and getting ready to commence my studies there when I received a rare phone call from my dad, who told me to come home immediately as I had to go off to Cornell, where I had received a late acceptance. I didn't even know that it was 4.5 hours from New York City. University changed my outlook completely. At school, I was more interested in playing football every day and stealing out to go look for the girls or parties, and certainly wasn't accustomed to the rigor and sleepless nights of architecture school. So I had no idea that Cornell had arguably two of the biggest names in architectural education, Colin Rowe and Oswald Matthias Ungers. Rowe, an Englishman and naturalized American, who Wikipedia describes as an architectural historian, critic, and theoretician and teacher, acknowledged to have been a major theoretical and critical influence in the second half of the 20th century on world architecture and urbanism. He produced 3 seminal works, Transparency, Literal and Phenomenal, The Mathematics of an Ideal Villa, and Collage City with Fred Cotter. Wikipedia describes Ungers as a German architect and architectural theorist, known for his rational designs and the use of cubic forms. His book, O.M. Ungers, Cosmos of Architecture, Recalibrating Architecture in the 1970s with Rem Koolhaas, and The Dialectic City and The City of Metaphors. Both these men, indirectly and directly, influenced my time at Cornell. Rowe with a humanist reinterpretation of the modern movement, with Le Corbusier as the major translator, while rejecting Corbusier's urban planning for the contextual idea of urban bricolage, exemplified in his book Collage City, and Ungers from the summer school in Berlin in 1977 that I attended, which produced the book The Urban Villa, Multifamily Dwelling Type, with his typologies, architecture as metaphor, and grids. He assembled very famous architects at the time to come to Berlin. This was before the wall had fallen, for 3 lectures every week for 2 months, 1 American, 1 German, and 1 European. People like Kenneth Frampton, Bob Stern, Raymond Abram, Richard Meyer, Charles Moore, Peter Eisman, Philip Johnson, Rem Koolhaas, Aldo Rossi, Victoria Gregotti, Alison and Peter Smithson, Hans Hollein, Robert Creer, Carlo Imanino, Massimo Scaleri, James Sterling, and Berliners, Jürgen Savade, George Hendricks, Joseph Kleihuis, Werner Deutmann, Rolf and Jan Rave, Volker Thyssen, and Johannes Hull, who had an impression on me because he based his entire architecture on Charlie Parker's music. The lecture series like this was open to the public and served as a platform for the exchange of ideas between students, architects, and different countries and the Berlin public. On returning to Jamaica, I was brought back to reality and humbled, realizing that as a new so-called architect, I knew nothing about the practical side of getting designs from concept to reality and dealing with wily contractors and alien construction contracts. Nevertheless, approach, ideas, metaphors, typologies, and grids were put to use and adapted to the context, climate, and culture, albeit in a modest and unpretentious way. So after that extensive background, I begin with one of the recurring metaphors at a basic scale, the building within a building, and an aha moment that I experienced some years ago. I was driving along the ABC highway in Barbados and suddenly saw an object off to the left side of the car and seemed instantly recognizable, although I had never seen it before. I stopped the car, reversed on the soft shoulder, got out, walked over, took out my mobile phone and snapped a picture. Yes, an aha moment. I had a sudden realization, inspiration, insight, recognition, and comprehension of the architecture that I had been trying to create for a few years. It was a building within a building. Simple, contextual, elegant, and most relevant to tropical design. The outer building was open, providing a covered outdoor space within which to enjoy the natural breezes and surrounded views, while the shaded and protected from the harsh sun and light rain. The inner building was enclosed, providing protection from the heavier winds and rain, as well as security. The space between the upper and the lower roof provided an insulation or pocket to reduce the heat load on the building envelope. There were also windows on all sides to provide cross-ventilation when opened. This typology, an open veranda twinned with a secure box, is most appropriate for the climate of the Caribbean and can also be seen in various forms in other areas of the region. So, the first residence designed over 40 years ago in Barbados. It was the first home for a young professional couple with a tight budget who wanted to break with tradition and engage an architect to maximize the 1,800 square feet that they could afford in order to give the appearance of a much larger and more spacious house. Nicknamed the Umbrella House, the design party was to separate the roof and its supporting columns from the rest of the building and construct these elements in the early months of the year when it was dry, so the roof canopy could provide shelter and shade from the elements to ensure that work to the other areas could proceed uninterrupted during the rainy season. Functionally, the house is divided into 3 simple hip-roofed pods, or umbrellas, creating a private bedroom zone, a private living dining room zone, and a carpet storage vehicular zone added later. The central entry and foyer acted as a divider space to separate the public zone from the private zone and to provide the initial view of the central garden with surrounding landscape, incorporating both inside and immediately outside the house. The 3 sets of 4 circular columns support each of the 3 pyramids that are closed by a pine ceiling that conceals the main beams. The enclosure walls are separated from this umbrella by a high-level ribbon window, forming a layer of transparency. These walls, sometimes curved, sometimes rectilinear, and sometimes chamfered, then dart inside and outside and in between the columns. This separation between wall and roof virtually extends the boundaries of the house and brings in a lot of natural light and adds to the calm, floating feeling as clouds move slowly by. The glazed mahogany front doors and curved natural coral stone were all built locally, while due to cost constraints, the other materials purchased were the least cost available off-the-shelf items based on standard sizes. A number of rooms were added a few years ago, but these additions have not affected the initial concept, and the front facade remains as pure and simple as it was 3 decades ago. The next residence is a small single-story house for a unique pioneering individual who wasn't afraid to be the first to construct a building described as a strong yet sympathetic statement in a small site of a hillshire cliff, long before electricity had reached the area. Nestled into its surroundings, the building blends into the landscape with its single, square, low-slung hip roof by the use of natural materials such as sand ash wood walls, old telephone poles for columns, and natural shingle roofs, as well as its primary forms and muted colors which capture the intrinsic spirit and character of the place. The plan is an L-shaped one with a private bedroom block to one side and the public and service block to the other. A central unified, half-closed and half-open space blurs the inside and outside lines as the living space opens onto and incorporates a large exterior trellised courtyard space to the house that is oriented to the onshore breezes and the view of the Kingston Harbor and Caribbean Sea. The principal bedroom also opens up to this courtyard, while the spiral stair links the adjacent porch with the upper wood floor, which is a study which has a high-level window. The third house I'm going to show is what I say interesting clients make interesting buildings. I recently had the pleasure of working with 2 sisters, Caroline and Donette Cooper, longtime family friends. Caroline is a former professor of literary and cultural studies at the University of the West Indies and the author of brash but important literary works such as Noises in the Blood, Orality, Gender, and the Vulgar Body of Jamaican Popular Culture, Bob Marley, The Man and His Music, and Sound Clash, the Jamaican dancehall culture. Donette is a Washington, D.C. based attorney at law, a textile, fiber artist, and quilter who has exhibited extensively over the last 25 years with permanent works in the National Museum of African American History. Her work is influenced by African textiles and the individual cultural and spiritual messages that they encode. The brief, in a nutshell, was to modify Caroline's existing 2-story house and create a two-bedroom addition with quilt studio for Donette as she planned to return to Jamaica after retirement. Both sisters are Afrocentric, proud of their heritage and culture, and make no reservations in challenging the colonial norms, even in the staid, upper-class Beverly Hills community on Long Mountain, where the residence is located. 3 site locations were looked at to the either side of the existing house and on top of it. The site slopes from north, east to southwest, with the upper-level views overlooking the city of Kingston. The existing 1950s concrete house is oriented to the southeast to capture the onshore breezes, while internally, the living and veranda have views of New Kingston. The architectural concept was based on adding a 3rd floor with openings at the corners to capture the views and breezes, while the structural concept was derived from the existing triangular columns, extended to create an A-frame to support the upper floor and provide a strong vertical facade for the entry to the existing house. Together with a second vertical element and entry stairs to the flat, they tie the three-story composition together. The upper floor is divided into two, the public living studio zone and the private sleeping and service zone. All major spaces, living, studio, and bedrooms are located on the corners to provide cross-ventilation and capture the views of the city to the southwest and the Blue Mountains to the northeast. Vertical wood slabs wrap around the entire box, acting as sunshades during sunny and windy periods and as shutters during hurricanes. The overall composition reflects the spirit and unabashed cultural outlook of the clients and seamlessly integrates modern tropical elements while providing two separate dwelling places in one location. The next project is the Basic Medical Sciences, now the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. To quote from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Laboratories for the 21st Century, as a building type, the laboratory demands our attention. What the cathedral was in the 14th century, the train station was in the 19th century, and the office building was in the 21st century, the laboratory is to the 21st century. That is, it is the building type that embodies in both program and technology the spirit and culture of our age and attracts some of the greatest intellectual and economic resources of our society. As buildings are responsible for 40% of the world's total primary energy consumption, the architect, engineering consultants, and university felt that this complex should play a role in leading the way to making it more of a green building. The building, therefore, has a number of features that conform to good environmental practices and energy efficiency, such as using chill beam air conditioning. This was the first time it was used in Jamaica, that utilized cooling from the nearby cogeneration plant, direct digital control, energy and building management system, solar lighting and heating and partial power, green roofs that replace the landscaped area taken up by the building, rainwater harvesting, grey water flushing, green fume hoods, another first in Jamaica, on-site water storage and disposal, grasscrete parking pavers, among other features, while making practical use of passive design strategies such as natural light, natural cooling concepts such as cross-ventilation, and also responding to site-specific conditions and natural environs. Today, however, I don't want to dwell on this, but rather focus on the low-tech passive design factors relevant to the topic, namely the client, the context, the climate, and the culture, and the symbiotic relationship between them and the resultant architecture. The university capped the building height at 6 stories and which translated into 80% coverage of a relatively small site. The original brief was for a new state-of-the-art facility to meet accreditation requirements, with specialized programs developed by various department heads. At first, each head of department wanted his or her own building. But after several meetings, detailed accommodation schedules, and discussions, the stakeholders agreed to do this vertically. As Jim Serling said, a design will start to emerge in the imagination when the relationship of spaces appears to have coherent organizational pattern. We therefore worked with each head of department, organizing their special flows and relationships to better understand and predict how we wanted each section to function. 2 climatic factors influence the design most: sun, the light and heat, and wind, the cooling breezes and hurricanes. Maximizing the abundance of natural light and the reduction in the amount of artificial light was a major factor in the extensive use of glazed areas to the offices, research areas, and laboratories. Our tropical climate, specifically the site's coordinates, as well as functional necessities such as work surface heights, counters, determine the extent of glazing. To reduce the heat buildup on the external surfaces, sunscreens and other shading devices were necessary to ensure that most glazed areas were protected. Sun paths on the various elevations determine the angles, location, and frequency of these sunscreens. As the building was to link the main university campus, originally the Mona Plantation, the teaching hospital, many of the shared facilities that would be used by both were placed in the east along the Aqueduct Road. These facilities include large lecture theaters, tutorial and seminar rooms, lounges and reading rooms, and network areas. The massing of the shared facilities on the eastern boundaries distributed as pods with ventilation pockets between them to allow the easterly breezes to flow through the complex. The sunscreens were engineered to protect the glass behind from flying debris, the main cause of damage during hurricanes, and the glazing to wide expanses were laminated. The existing north-south link between the university campus to the medical campus emphasized the overall axis of the site and movement of students on foot. Countering this was a natural inclination to design an east-west oriented building to minimize the eastern and western exposures. However, the eastern view of the nearby old aqueduct the Great Lawn and mountains is spectacular, with the morning sun rising quickly. The advantages, therefore, greatly outweighed the slight disadvantage that was overcome with protection by selective shading. The lower section of the site was called Aki Walk because of the Aki trees in the south, where the cluster forms a rich canopy near to West Road. Culturally, the planting of Aki trees is associated with slave graves, and indeed a number of these remains, while not found on the immediate site, were discovered next door during excavation for the drainage pipe in the road just west of the site. The Aki Grove is therefore a distinctive feature and good starting point to lead visitors into the site. In the design, the existing node is reinforced by the creation of a fairly low semicircular amphitheater for small gatherings. It slopes from the west road towards the central areas of the site. The Aki is also Jamaica's national dish and enshrined in our folk songs. Another cultural element is the cotton tree. In Jamaica, the cotton tree is associated with ghosts, or what we call duppies. And as noted Jamaican cultural icon Olive Sr. has noted, the tree is widely regarded as an object of both superstition and awe. And it is generally felt that a cotton tree should not be cut down, or else something bad will happen to you. Well, I didn't want anything to happen to us. So we tried to keep it. With its tall, straight trunk and its location near the center of the site, the cotton tree became an important vertical element and an ideal focal point. It is therefore around this tree that the main design elements are based. Meeting the functional requirements, understanding the existing climatic and contextual influences, and a sympathetic approach to cultural norms led to a strong inside-outside relationship between the natural and the built environment, keeping the existing cotton and Aki trees while creating functional and pleasant spaces for students and tutors to learn and relax. The complex is roughly divided into four: a linear block, a central east-west block, and a northern section, and two southwest blocks to be constructed in phase 2. That would be C and D. These blocks form two major open-to-sky spaces, a linear lawn to the north and a central plaza to the south that leads from the Aki Grove to the entrance. Block A is extremely long, 160 meters, a three-story building consisting of 5 individual two-story object-type buildings housing shared facilities that are capped by a truss or protective canopy with laboratories and research offices at the top level. As the two main elevations of the canopy face east and west, all glazed areas are protected with vertical sunscreens that are more closely spaced on the western elevation. The canopy is supported by columns at 8 meters with X-brace trusses, and it ends in the south with a dramatic cantilever over the main entry at the intersection of the west and aqueduct roads at the southern end of the site. The main pedestrian entry is under the canopy and through the Aki Grove up to the amphitheater steps and into the Agora or central meeting plaza. Block B ties the eastern and northern sections of the cotton with the cotton tree acting as a pivot or joint to Block A. This is it, and you can see the cotton tree. Oops. The cotton tree at the central area where blocks A and B meet. The main pedestrian entries on the canopy of Aki Grove. Block B is the tallest section of the complex and is accessed both from the basement parking level as well as from the main entrance off of the plaza. Its form is ideal for a passive solar design standpoint, being fairly narrow and long with the small surface areas facing east and west. Inside Block B, there are 2 atria. One is a 6-story space that links the main labs, and the smaller one, a 3-story space. Both act as light wells and bring natural light to the lowest levels of the building through a space frame and skylights. And this area is not air conditioned. The block has a complete floor-to-floor pattern of extruded white sunshades, except for the main centrally stacked meeting and conference rooms that open up to views of the main campus and Long Mountain to the south, while being partially protected by the placement of the stair tower to the southwest and the bird canopy cantilevering from the roof. Block B is stepped back and more square in plan than long and narrow. Extensive sunscreens shade all glazed areas to the west elevation and upper 3 floors of the east elevation, while no sunscreens are required on the lower east elevation, as the neighboring Block A protects as a natural sun shield to protect this area. The northern elevation is virtually no shading at all to capitalize on the fabulous views of the majestic Blue Mountains. And as I said earlier, they only 2 or 3 months of the year is actual sun to the north. Outside, inside, upstairs and downstairs, daytime and nighttime, the elements of nature, the occupants, and the architecture are all around, juxtaposed in several different and interesting ways, symbolizing the university's theme of rooted in tradition but focused in the future. The next project is in St. Anne, which is on the north coast of the island. And my first impression of the location, the site and the context was total chaos. The driveway was choked with cars and huts. The Sailor's Hole was in bad shape and barely accessible, while the river was used as a service back-of-house area, washing and emptying trash, and the beach was overcrowded and hardly visible. The place had a reputation for drugs and harassment of visitors, if you could only actually get in. However, with the problems, we saw potentials, and there were 4 elements that stood out. 1, the existing trees. 2, the pool or sailor's hole. 3, the river. And 4, the beach. And the uniqueness of the site, as well as the beautiful carvings in the trees. So this shows the entrance and some of the carvings in the trees. The client, the Port Authority, initially wanted to remove everything, get rid of the existing occupants, clean the site, replace all the shacks with 3 or 4 established local restaurants, and cater to the cruise ship tourists. However, when we introduced them to Oistins in Barbados as a precedent, this was an area in Barbados which was not done for tourists. It was a fisherman's beach. It catered predominantly to locals buying dolphin and kingfish on a Friday evening, and over time became so popular that the tourists started to flock. We were able to convince the client that rather than knocking down everything and building buildings for high-end restaurants for the tourists, that they use this as a precedent. So the clients engaged Mona Informatics to do a study of the site, the assets, shops, the fisher folks, the social scene, the environmental conditions, the sanitation, food handling, to get the exact number and type of facilities, and assisted the existing fishermen and shop owners to formalize their association, now called the Sailors' Hole Benevolent Society. While some of these stakeholders were then temporarily located, an area on the beach was reserved for the fishermen so that they could continue to ply their trade. And many of them were also engaged as subcontractors to the main contractor and worked on the excavation, the diversion of the river, and the cut stone wall, even adding their own flair and color of choice and spacing of the stones, which wasn't what we had designed originally. The architectural concept emerged from a melting pot of the relevant brief, in a broader sense, the client, the climate, protection from the sun, wind, and rain, while capturing the northeast breezes, the context, in particular the axial grove of tall entry trees, the pool, the river, the beach, and the sea, and the culture, the fishermen's daily marine rituals, the colorful boats, and the art and craft of the work and music that was there. So firstly, we created a wider, more accessible entry. We insisted that all the trees be kept, even although trimmed initially, even if we had to twist the road, which we had to do a little bit, or to lose 1 or 2 parking spaces, as they formed an axial grove on either side of the driveway. Then we proposed a main central restaurant block to provide a constant visual connection between the entrance, the beach, and the sea. From you arrived, we enlarged the pool and made some of the adjustments to the river to bring it to prominence in front rather than behind, so that all the shops opened on to a new deck east of the river. And finally, we opened up the expanse of the beach so that it can now accommodate both the fishing boats and a new sand amphitheater area for mixed activities. Overall, the idea and design intent was to create a strong relationship with the beach and the water generally, as both the sea and the river are now always visible from the entry and all public areas. The existing residents were then given first refusal on the shops, and based on their income, we started with a 5.4 square base model that could be quartered, halved, or doubled, both horizontally and vertically, giving at least 5 or 6 option sizes, depending on the area requirements and what could be afforded, while maintaining an overall uniform look. The envelope is very resilient and becomes a bunker during the natural wind hazards. It is wrapped with light wood strips to add further insulation to the walls. The lightweight white roof, supported by slender steel columns or a building over a building again, reflects the sun's intense heat and provides shade to the area immediately in front of the shops. The curved restaurant frames a mini amphitheater with sand stage and has 4 uses. The upper floor houses 2 restaurants with commercial kitchens, while the ground floor has an undercroft to the east with shared dining and multipurpose covered open space with fully accessible public washrooms. To the west is the fisherman's service area, cold room, lockers, changing room, showers, etc. So to summarize the design intent, the existing trees were kept, in particular those lining the existing entryway. The main large restaurants were raised on pillar T and centrally located to allow visual access to the beach, with all dining areas taking advantage of the excellent views. There's a clear separation of vehicular and pedestrian traffic, reinforced by strong landscape elements with regularly spaced trees running parallel to the main walkway and boardwalk. The sailor's hole or plunge pool was further developed, while the river was cleaned to become the important central feature which runs through the site. All shops were located on the east with a strong relationship with the river and the main walkway or boardwalk that culminates by the sea. The beach was cleared and increased and enhanced. The beach becomes a central party area at night, framed by the curve of the restaurants and dining areas. And the services, including solar for heating and lighting, the storage facilities for the fishermen were discreetly located to the west. And these are the owners of the shops, which had were various sizes and so architecture is sometimes defined as the art of and science of building. The pioneers of modern architecture, much criticized, sometimes justifiably so, especially with respect to city planning, added morality to the design and creation of buildings definition, in that they wanted better conditions, a cleaner, more sanitary and healthy environment for the regular citizen. So hopefully this project has achieved a little bit of both. And so I'd like to read from the conclusion from Wilmot Dixon's brief noting the impacts of construction on the built environment. Our built environment and its interactions with the natural environment are complex and have a massive impact on the world around us. Hence, sustainability is a complex concept which encompasses not just energy, but all the resources needed to supply human activity. A large part of building sustainably is concerned with addressing global warming that is driving climate change, using energy conservation and techniques such as life cycle assessment to maintain a balance between capital and long-term asset value. However, it is also important about enhancing biodiversity, creating spaces that are healthy, economically viable, and sensitive to social needs. Rather than constantly battling against the natural environment, we need to start respecting natural systems and learning from ecological processes, creating a better balance between human need and the wider environment. That's the guys from my office who worked on worked on the project. This is a dental and medical complex in Montego Bay, where the aim of the client was to deliver accommodating, passionate, streamlined, and safe medical services of the highest quality without the clinical feeling of a standard medical center. The services offered were radiology, oral and maxillofacial surgery, cardiology, outpatient surgery, pharmacy, speculative areas such as medical and dental practices, conference and meeting rooms. We did a lot of research in doing this building in terms of the environment and trying to get away from the typical medical center in Jamaica, which was a double-loaded corridor inside the building. So the corridors were closed. There was overcrowded. There were lack of a variety of spaces. There was very little light. And overall, in our opinion, didn't promote wellness. The primary function of the healthcare industry is to treat patients with curative, preventative, and rehabilitative care. This often results to the architectural environment being less of a priority. And so most medical centers do not provide a very comforting environment and can be very bland, sterile, and uninviting. This design, we believe, is different and is based in part on a special focus on the flow of the patient and the care provider. So this is a cross-section of the concept of the building, where it was a 3-story building with the various medical offices. It was facing east, so it had a brise at the front. The natural light would be able to come in. It was a high-level roof, so that all the waiting areas didn't have to be air conditioned. There was a garden at the front. So unlike the typical medical center, it aimed at being different. The facilities, there was a connection to the staff. Patients wanted to be noticed upon arrival and not overlooked. It was conducive to well-being. Patients wanted creative comforts to keep them from being bored or anxious. It was easily accessible, so they wanted to be able to get in and out of the clinic as fast as possible and to have ease of wayfinding. It was confidential and private. There were outside areas, but inside closed areas, so you'd move from space to space. So even though the waiting time may have remained the same, because you're moving from area to area, it didn't appear as such. And also it accommodated caring for the family. In Jamaica, in particular, medical facilities they deal with the patient only. Whereas we were able to convince them that it would be better that the person who was seeking treatment was allowed to carry family with them. And therefore there was additional seatage and signage that accommodates the elderly and those with various impairments. And of course, being close to nature, where the patients highly value views of gardens, sky, natural light, as well as contact with nature. And so this shows, based on the site, it was a very funny shaped site. So they had 2 main roads. One was Port Avenue and the other one was Crane Boulevard. And then we created a road in between, which also faced west, which in Jamaica is the worst face. So we had most of the services and service access from that side, whereas the east, the brise shielded the eastern areas from the sun in the morning, and there was a pool area and garden, off of which you then enter the various facilities. And this is a completed building. And the last one I think I'll show is, because it's a campus, this is a new IT building at Harrison College. And this was really a challenge for us because if anybody knows about Barbados, Harrison College is the oldest university there from, not university, high school from the early 1700s. And getting a building approved by the board was very difficult, particularly a building like what we were trying to do. And so we had to make a presentation to the board, and we did our research and made a number of quotations. One was that the campus is a physical manifestation of educational philosophy to which the school is committed, and that it is conveyed through educational experience. And the planning and creation of contemporary buildings signal the college's willingness to foster the best of innovative architecture, thus contributing to an expanse of knowledge and experience with the physical environment. Originally, the board wanted us to do a building that looked like some of the existing buildings that were there. And so we gave them another quotation which said, "The architecture of a college campus plays a central role in the education of its students. The buildings of a campus themselves each have a unique message they were created to share. Buildings are able to create a message with the world by calling upon a cultural recognition of historical, emotional, and symbolic elements to a specific significance they were designed to express. With this in mind, it is vital to construct a university campus specifically to foster independent thought and discovery learning. An ideal college campus plan would incorporate the values of the past with a love of nature and the acceptance of change." And so with this, we approached with the context, the sensitivity, and to respect for the project local and environmental conditions strongly influence the design process. The firm is continually aware that architects must take the lead in ensuring sustainable development, protecting the physical environments, and minimizing the impact of negative influences while shaping a built environment to the overall benefit of the society. And so we took them through the whole historical context of the building, going back to 1733 when the school was founded, and this sort of history and development of the schools and the various buildings on the campus. So from an architectural perspective, it was important to look at the building and construction in history of the school to see how the design structure and the campus evolved, and to analyze the layout and relationship of the buildings to try to understand the important planning and architectural decisions that exist to ensure that our intervention continued existing themes and was consistent with the dominant characteristics of this design structure. And so we looked at various things: building orientation, focal points, defining open spaces, defining streets and corridors, framing views, looking at trees, terminating vistas, creating edges, a forest of trees, and so on. And I'll give another quote from Architectural Oppression. "Architecture has the potential to promote the importance of self-discovery, innovation, and free thought, as well as respect for history, knowledge, and the natural world. The presence of open glass buildings in new spaces on campus would provide a liberated environment free of emotionally and intellectually stifling traditional structures. Any college campus should be constructed to provide an atmosphere of acceptance and openness to new ideas. It should be an environment where each student is free to express his or herself freely and independently. And I think it was this quote that won over the board because when I went in to make the presentation, everybody looked grumpy and sullen and ready to, kick me out. And at the end of it, they all clapped. So we proposed a building located between the main hall and the only other modern building on site, which was designed by one of Mark's former partners. This shows the different architectural elements. You know that building? Yes, the library. So the building that we located was between the library, which was set back a little bit, and the hall. So we ended up with a fairly long, thin, single room, wide building running more or less east-west on 2 stories. And I ended by quoting this quote, after which they approved the building, and it was built within a year after that. Yes.